Councillors, I think we'll begin. I declare the Ordinary Council meeting of the 18th of August 2020 held in Council Chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:34 p.m. I welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of this area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. Welcome everyone. I'd also like to add the note that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed from the city's website. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Recordings will be made available on the city's website when the minutes are uploaded. Confidential council meetings or confidential sections of council meetings will not be live streamed or recorded. So councillors, we are now at item 2 on our agenda, apologies and leave of absence. We have a leave of absence from Councillor Phelan tonight. Item 3 is disclosures of interest. I understand we have some disclosures of interest. Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. The first is I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on 18 August 2020. It's agenda item C6, which is the budget. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is I have a brother who is a member of Onslow Park Tennis Club and an amount has been included in the budget for capital works at the club. Thank you. My second one is I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting to be held on 18 August 2020. That's agenda item C7. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality pursuant to Regulation 11 of the Local Government Rules of Conduct Regulations 2007. The nature of my interest is that it has today been revealed that the invoice of McLeod's dated 24 March 2020 is related to advice taken about Matheson versus Local Government Standard Panel 2020 WASAT 26. In the period prior to my election as a councillor, at the request of Ms Matheson, I provided Ms Matheson with assistance in respect of complaints lodged against her, including the complaint the subject of 2020 WASAT 26. Thank you.
Any other further disclosures of interest? Thank you. Councillor Hammersley, if you could just bring them up to governance, please. Just checking. So, councillors, we're at item 4, response to previous questions, public questions taken on notice, of which there are none. And we now move to public question time. CEO.
Through you, presiding member. In regards to attendance at this public meeting, clauses 3.11, 2 and 3 of the City's Meeting Procedures Local Law require that a person attending the council meeting must extend the courtesy and respect to the council and the process under which it operates and shall comply with the directions of the presiding member. The Meeting Procedures Local Law also states a person observing a meeting must not create a disturbance at the meeting by interrupting or interfering in the proceedings, whether by expressing approval or dissent, by conversing or by any other means. I ask that all present abide by the provisions of the Meeting Procedures Local Law and act appropriately. All views on matters before Council this evening are valid, and I ask that we all show the courtesy of expressing, show the courtesy expressing those views without interruption, be they the views of the public gallery or elected members. Should this meeting be interrupted by members of the public gallery, the meeting may be adjourned and those causing the disturbance may be asked to leave. I remind each person making a statement that you have a limit to 3 minutes, and for those asking questions, you will need to restrict your questions to 2 questions with no preamble. Please ensure that mobile phones are turned off or switched to silent, and you are reminded that there is no recordings or photography permitted in this meeting. I thank you in your advance for your adherence to the proceedings for tonight's meeting.
So we are now moving to the public time in our meeting, and first we have public questions. Our first question is from Mr. Rod Kent of Barker Road in Subiaco. If you'd like to share your question, please.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. Good evening. This is in relation to the development in Forest Street, 51 Forest Street. If a development meets the technical requirements for approval, but fails to meet the moral, ethical and aesthetic requirements due to the development's potential impact on the physical health, mental well-being and the property values of its neighbours, under these circumstances, do the elected councillors have a duty of care to protect the residents of Subiaco from this type of development? Yes or no? I guess your vote will answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you. Director for Community and Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In response to your question, in considering an application for development approval, the decision maker is to make that decision against the planning framework. Whilst concerns related to health of neighbours and property values are noted, these are not relevant planning considerations in determining an application for development approval. Thank you.
Our next question is from Ms. Julie Matheson of Coghlan Road in Subiaco.
Thank you, Mayor, and excuse me. I wish to, under the directions of Mr. Hawkins, I wish to delete the preamble for my question 1, as requested by Mr. Hawkins today. My first question is, why has the City of Subiaco failed to answer the request made on the 25th of May 2020 for payment of legal fees and damages incurred by me, former Councillor Julie Matheson, in review proceedings in the State Administrative Tribunal number CC 1158 of 2019 in circumstances where the Tribunal found that the CEO and the Mayor failed to respond in reasonable concerns about the issues of the exclusion of the public. And my question 2, as per the instructions of Mr. Hawkins, I wish to delete the preamble. My question 2 is, will the City of Subiaco agree to make payment for legal fees and claim for damages incurred by me, former Julie Matheson, Councillor Julie Matheson, in review proceedings in the State Administrative Tribunal number CC 1158 of 2019 in circumstances where the Tribunal found that the CEO and Mayor failed to respond to reasonable concerns about the issues of the exclusion of the public. Thank you.
Acting CEO.
Through you, Mayor Taylor. In relation to your first question, I understand the City has responded to Ms Matheson to request more information to lodge with the City's insurers. The City has been notified that the City's insurers have been communicating directly with Ms Matheson regarding her claim. In relation to question 2, the City has responded to Ms Matheson's request for more information to be lodged with the City's insurers. The City has been notified that the City's insurers have been communicating directly with Ms Matheson regarding her claim, and as this claim has been lodged with the City's insurers, the City of Subiaco cannot provide further comment.
Just as a comment, for the 2 years before I came to council to the 2 years after being elected as mayor, items considered behind closed doors has dropped by 25%. These are the facts as given to me by administration. Our next question is from Mr. Fred Marsh of Kathleen Street in Trigg. If you'd like to come and share your question, please.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor and councillors. The item is number 51 Forest Street, Subiaco. I am Fred Marsh, and my wife, sitting here with a walking stick, is my wife Edna. We are both 92 and live in a 2-storey house. My wife has arthritis and finds the 17 steps about 10 times a day very painful. And we wish to move to the proposed apartments at 51 Forest Street as soon as possible. My daughter is the applicant, and she has designed the apartment so we can live with her on a single level, wheelchair accessible home in the heart of Subiaco. As the design achieved 1, design excellence, and has been 2, recommended for approval by the City of Subiaco administration. Can this application be approved under the lawful planning frameworks contained in 1, Local Planning Scheme number 5, 2, the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan, and 3, the SPP 7.3R Codes Volume 2 Multiple Dwellings?
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Acting Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, the application in its current form is considered to meet the planning framework.
Mr. Marsh, if you'd like to resume your seat, thank you. Next question is from Mr. John Godfrey of Hilda Street in Shenton Park, and I understand this is to be read by Ms. Leader.
Thank you. John's apologies, he's recovering from a quadruple bypass. It's question 1. This is John's question at the July 21, 2020 meeting was not answered. He asked about the legal implications of the East Ward proposed car park / hard court facilities, as Subiaco doesn't have ownership of the required land. I was told that although the city has advocated for freehold title of the site, the Department of Planning, etc., has advised that the state would, instead, be willing to grant the city a management order. This was followed by clarification, i.e. that the Crown would remain the legal owner of the site, while the city would be granted the care, control and management of the site. He now asks again, what are the legal implications of such an arrangement, namely if the state government does not give the council freehold title to such an area? His second question. Noting the appointment of Director of Corporate Services Hawkins to acting CEO, will the Mayor give assurance that he had nothing to do with the annotation of the August 18 minutes to which the SAT commented in its dismissal of the Matheson complaint? Thank you.
Thank you. Manager for Finance and Governance.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Taylor. In regards to question 1, it is not appropriate for the city to provide legal advice, including in response to public questions. The city cannot add any further information to responses previously provided. In response to question 2, the administration cannot speak on behalf of the Mayor or Council. The City of Subiaco were not a party to the SAT referenced. The details of the annotations made to the August 2018 minutes have been dealt with on a number of previous occasions, and the City has no further comment. Thank you.
Our next question is from Michelle Druart of Barker Road. If you'd like to come and share your question, please.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, CEO, councillors and staff of the City of Subiaco. My name is Michelle Drewer and I live at Unit 2420 Barker Road, Subiaco, where I have resided for 26 years since January 1994. My two questions concern the proposed building at 51 Forest Street, and in asking them I speak for other owners of our premises, in particular our Strata Committee members, Angela Swain, Unit 1, Grace Chu, Unit 5, Simon Park, Unit 7, Robert Kamen, Unit 8, Gemma Nisbet, Unit 11. Our questions relate to the statements sent to be read for this meeting. My first question, answered inadequately after June 9th. Who will be responsible for structural damage, the effect on the easement, the dust and disturbance, the deprivation of privacy, the effects of overshadowing, and the cost should these occur? Who will pay? My second question concerns overshadowing especially, and the mention made by the opposition of the proposed building as ideal for ageing in place. Considering that some of us at 420 Barker Road bought our units, especially those on the ground floor, precisely so that we could age in place, with the train station and Rockaby Road shops a short walking distance away, and particularly with no overshadowing, but enough light to help maintain our health through our final years, why should a person's ageing in place in our building not be as important as the hypothetical ageing in place of anyone in the proposed building? Surely, if anyone should have priority, it must be the residents who are already in place. As indicated in my statement, we badly need the space and light that remains to us and the peace and privacy for the sake of our health and well-being. Thank you.
Director of Community and Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In response to the first question, recommended condition 14 requires preparation of dilapidation reports for a number of properties, including 420 Barker Road, Subiaco. This information assists in resolving any civil disputes between parties as a result of construction-related works. It is the responsible builder's responsibility to provide structural engineering detailed confirmation that adverse effects will not occur. The work affecting other land provisions of Part 6 of the Building Act 2011 apply, which provides that a person responsible for work must ensure that the work does not adversely affect land beyond the boundaries of the work's land. Recommended condition 13 requires preparation of a construction management plan, which covers a range of considerations, including dust. In relation to overshadowing and visual privacy, these have been discussed in detail in the officer's report and are considered to meet the element objectives of State Planning Policy 7.3, Residential Design Codes, Volume 2, Apartments. In response to your second question, in relation to overshadowing, this matter has been considered in detail in the officer's report, and the proposal is considered to meet the element objectives of State Planning Policy 7.3, Residential Design Codes, Volume 2, Apartments. In considering the shadow cast by the proposal to the adjoining property to the south, the assessment takes into account the sun's angle at the winter solstice, at which time the sun is at its lowest point and has potential to cast its most significant shadow to an adjoining property. The overshadowing from the proposal is considered to be consistent with the planning framework and is therefore supported. Thank you.
Our next question is from Ms. Leader from Shenton Park.
Good evening again from myself. Just one question now. At the special council meeting, I asked when the CEO assessment panel changed to entire council and when reviews were conducted. Although staff are uninvolved in this process, the then Director of Corporate Services, who's now the acting CEO, responded, not answered, that council could resolve to change the panel, but not that this had actually happened. I'm grateful to the Mayor for then unexpectedly responding herself and hope she will do so again. In the interests of procedural fairness, this question is directed to the Mayor, representing council and not to staff, and notes she has already said, following the failed special council meeting in early April, the reviewers notified her, as presiding member, that they were resigning. When was council formally notified of the resignation in order to approve it? Thank you.
Manager for Finance and Governance Services.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Taylor. The administration cannot speak on behalf of the Mayor and Council, and in addition cannot provide comment on confidential council meetings. Thank you.
Our next question is from Mr. Tony Costa of Forest Street, Subiaco, and I understand Alicia Taylor is going to be asking this question on his behalf.
Yep. Dear Mayor, Deputy Mayor, CEO, councillors and City of Subiaco staff, and this is two questions regarding C151 Forest Street, Subiaco. This development will cast substantial shadow on 47A Forest Street on the eastern side of the DA, 57 Forest Street on the western side of the DA, and onto 420 Barker Road units at the rear, which could reduce the value of those units. What financial responsibility will the City of Subiaco take if the shadowing is more substantial than what the applicant has alluded to, particularly if there is less development potential as a direct result of the development application? Question 2. Why is the City of Subiaco seemingly happy to sacrifice the fabric of existing buildings and the homes of residents in Forest Street and Barker Road, many who have lived there for many decades, whilst giving preference to DA applications that financially benefit the applicant and substantially financially disadvantages their neighbours, reducing their amenity and right to sunlight and ambience of the area?
Thank you. Acting Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In response to question 1, whilst concerns related to overshadowing are important considerations in ensuring the amenity of adjoining residential properties is maintained, the potential impact on property value is not a relevant planning consideration in determining an application for development approval. The approval of this development would not reduce the ability for adjoining landowners to consider redevelopment of their properties in line with the relevant planning framework. In response to question 2, the City cannot stop landowners from seeking to redevelop their properties. The scale to which a landowner chooses to redevelop their property varies. However, the development must be considered with the planning framework for approval to be considered. In this application, the planning framework requires the City to give due regard to the intended future character of the zone. As the subject site is located within the town centre area of the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan, it is intended that this area have increased development standards that provide opportunities to facilitate the growth and development of the Subiaco Town Centre. The impacts upon adjoining property has been considered as required by the planning framework.
Thank you. And Ms. Alicia Taylor, I believe you have questions from yourself as well.
Yep. Okay. Dear Mayor, Deputy Mayor, CEO, councillors and City of Subiaco staff. Do building services include structural engineering, and do planning services have sufficient qualifications and building experience to be able to show that building high-rise boundary to boundary can be achieved without damage to adjoining 100-year-old properties, and giving addresses of properties where this has been achieved without damage? Question 2, if the DA happens to be approved, can building services and planning services confirm there will be no approval granted for the car stacker to be moved elsewhere other than the eastern wall on the southern end as per the development application lodged?
Director of Community and Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In response to your first question, in relation to planning considerations on this matter, the planning framework permits development boundary to boundary. Whilst the ability to build boundary to boundary is provided, matters relating to structural matters are not relevant planning considerations. Should approval be granted, these issues will be addressed at the demolition and building permit stage under separate legislation other than the Planning and Development Act 2005, which this application relates to. Similar to a previous response that I've given, it is the responsible builder's responsibility to provide structural engineering detailed confirmation that adverse effects will not occur. The work affecting other land provisions of Part 6 of the Building Act 2011 apply, which provides that a person responsible for work must ensure that the work does not adversely affect land beyond the boundaries of the work's land. The structural engineering technical details submitted with the building permit application must include methodologies demonstrating that the proposed building work can be carried out without detrimentally affecting surrounding buildings and property. In response to your second question, if the development plans are approved in their current form, should the applicant seek to relocate the car stacker, this may necessitate further consideration in the form of an amended development application. The City cannot comment further on what may or may not occur in regards to the location of the car stackers in the future. Should the application receive development approval from Council, the applicant may seek to alter the parking arrangement at a later date. If this were to occur, the City would need to consider the changes in line with the planning framework and determine whether an amendment to the development approval was required to facilitate this. The car stacker location must be in accordance with the approved development application drawings and must comply with the required building standards, the Building Code of Australia. Thank you.
Our next question is from Mr. Graham Taylor of Forest Street, Subiaco.
Good evening, Mayor, councillors and staff. I own 57 Forest Street, Subiaco, which is on the west side of the DA for 51. My first question, why did Executive Staff, Planning Services, refuse my request to meet on site with me at the rear of 57 Forest Street? The reason for that is that they could then overlook the flats at the back and see the perspective of how high 21.5 metres would be. My concern is the 25.1 metre high development with 15.5 metre high boundary to boundary wall and the possible impacts to my 100-year-old property and adjacent properties, and also with no approach by the design review panel before making this recommendation. I should correct, before making their recommendation. Question 2. Why didn't Planning Services do their own calculations or ask for a resubmission when it was pointed out that the perspective images of the DA seemed to understate the true height of the building by approximately 20% relative to adjoining properties and could be misleading to all? I might add that I also sent that request not only to Council but to the applicant, and I got no reply. I was concerned that what was submitted was misleading to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Acting Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In response to question 1, Planning Services have undertaken site inspections as required to assist their planning assessment against the planning framework and recommendation to Council. In response to question 2, perspective images are conceptual images and are only used to gain an understanding of what the overall development may appear like in the context of the street. These do not necessarily form part of the approved plans. The elevations, which are included in the package of development plans, are what are used for assessment purposes.
Thank you. Our next question is from Ms. Doris Taylor of Trig. If you'd like to come and share your questions, please.
I'm reading this one out for Doris Taylor. 2 questions.
you. Director of Director of Community and Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In response to the first question, as part of the recommended conditions of development approval, the City has included its standard condition relating to the requirement for dilapidation surveys of identified adjoining properties. This condition is also accompanied by the City's adopted advice note, which sets out the matters to be considered and addressed by the applicant or landowner in satisfying condition 14. In response to the second question, recommended condition 2 requires all stormwater generated on site to be retained on site. Detailed stormwater management plans are required to be submitted at the building permit stage. Thank you.
Our next question is from Ms Diane Russell of Forest Street, Subiaco. If you'd like to share your question, please.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, Deputy Mayor, councillors and City of Subiaco staff. My first question, why was the decision against this development application not determined after the June 9th council meeting? When I asked the CEO, Ms Lavery, at our meeting on the 7th of August, she replied, "This sometimes happens," which I felt did not properly answer my question, so I'm hoping councillors will tonight. Thank you. And my second question, how can this development application be resubmitted to council for a second vote in 2 months when no changes have been made to the plan and without the proper due process of being put up for public comment on the Have Your Say Council website, or letters being sent to adjoining owners, or a sign being erected at 51 Forest Street? Thank you.
Thank you. Acting Manager for Planning Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In response to the first question, at its ordinary council meeting of 9th of June 2020, to determine the application, council was required to either approve with conditions, or refuse the application. No determination was made at that meeting. The deemed refusal is available to the applicant to take if it wished to pursue an application for review at the State Administrative Tribunal. However, the applicant is also within its rights to extend the time within which the development application is to be determined in consultation with the local government. In this instance, it has been agreed to the ordinary council meeting on the 18th of August 2020. In response to question 2, the application hasn't been resubmitted, and it is the same application that was considered by council at its ordinary council meeting of 9th of June 2020. The application was advertised as a significant application for a period of 28 days from the 21st of February 2020 to the 20th of March 2020. There is no further requirement for further advertising under Council's Local Planning Policy 1.4, Public Consultation for Planning Proposals.
Our next question is from Mr Peter Garside of York Street in Subiaco. If you'd like to share your questions, please.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. How much of ratepayers' money has been spent at SAT defending projects that have been recommended for by the planning officers pre-2018 and post-2018? Thank you.
Director of Community and Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. Since 2018, there have been no development applications that have been recommended either for approval or refusal by officers, and where council has gone against that recommendation and their determination, which has then ended up at SAT. Notwithstanding, the costs of a SAT appeal are not a relevant planning consideration. Thank you.
So, councillors, we've come to the end of public question time, but we now move straight into public statement time. Our first public statement is from Ms Michelle Drouart. If you'd like to come and share your statement, please.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, CEO, Deputy Mayor, councillors and staff of the City of Subiaco. My name is Michelle Drouin and I live at Unit 2, 420 Barker Road, Subiaco, where I have resided for 26 years since January 1994. My statement concerns the proposed building at 51 Forest Street. In making it, I speak for other owners of our premises, in particular our Strata Committee members, Angela Swain, Unit 1, Grace Chu, Unit 5, Simon Park, Unit 7, Robert Kamen, Unit 8, and Gemma Nisbet, Unit 11. We are concerned about the possible structural damage that could be caused to our premises by demolition and construction carried out on a small area of land close to our lot. Further, flood damage in past storms has been mitigated by the easement that runs under our west side lawn. We depend on its presence and it cannot be interfered with. There is also the matter of dust and disturbance, which are bound to affect the residents in our building if construction work is carried out so close to us. However, our chief concern is the overshadowing on our own property. Ours is a 3-storey, 12-unit apartment block. We depend on its north-facing aspect for most of our daylight. Living premises are unhealthy without at least some sunlight for part of each day. A building behind us of the height proposed, whatever the number of stories, would deprive us of that natural light. At a more personal level, in my ground floor unit, I rely heavily on daylight entering from the north-facing kitchen. In 2003, I had the carpet replaced with off-white tiles to reflect more light. That improvement would be lost if a tall building were to be constructed behind us. Also, with the terraces of the proposed development, looking straight into all our units, our privacy would be severely compromised. Our own windows and balconies do not look down or across into those of any other residences. Mention has been made of the proposed building's opportunities for ageing in place, but I am not the only owner who bought my unit for ageing in place, with a railway station and Rockaby Road a short walking distance away. For myself, I have no stairs to negotiate, but have still enough light to help maintain health through my final years. If this building were to be constructed, I could not remain, and yet to be compelled to leave in my 70s and with recent health problems would be a death knell. On behalf of owners at 420 Barker Road, I can only reiterate, we badly need the space and light that remain to us and the peace and privacy for the sake of our health and well-being. Thank you.
That noise, just in case members of the gallery are wondering, is when the timer ends for the speaker, just for the record. Our next statement is from Ms. Angela Swain of 420 Barker Road. Are you reading this one as well?
Realise this is not on, sorry. However, neither of those buildings is directly opposite our apartments' windows and balconies. The proposed construction of 51 Forest Street is another matter. We almost all rely on light coming in from the north through our back windows or onto our balconies and patios, as many of our front living room face south, and what light we receive through the sliding doors there is very weak. Of all 12 units, the only ones that do not have north-facing windows are units 3, 7 and 11. Even these 3 units receive some light from the northeast at their kitchen windows, light that would also be partly blocked by a building such as that proposed. If any building of more than 2 stories were to be constructed at 51 Forest Street, it would prevent the light we currently enjoy from reaching us, and we wouldn't see the sky. The proposed building would leave us with insufficient light all of the day. Those of us on the ground floor especially would find ourselves living in darkness as our units will be totally overshadowed. Such conditions are extremely unhealthy and no one should be compelled to live that way. We also have a clothesline, a lawn and a small garden behind our apartments. All of these, but the garden especially, would receive no sun. The bushes and other plants we have there along our back wall and near the stairwells cannot possibly grow in such conditions. We mostly agree with the attempts to limit Perth's urban sprawl and bring more of the population closer to the city, but infill and greater population density should never be at the expense of those already living in the places affected. We note that mention has been made of ageing in place for older residents in the proposed building. However, some of us bought our units at 420 Barker Road precisely so that we could age in place there. For instance, 2 of the ground floor units were chosen because elderly residents have no stairs to negotiate but can still receive enough light to help maintain their health over their final years. Why should a person's ageing in place in these units not be considered as important as that of residents in the proposed building? In fact, if anyone should have priority, surely it must be the residents already in place. We ask you to carefully reconsider this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next statement is from Mr. Kim Dopel of Forest Street, Subiaco.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor and councillors and staff. I wish to make a statement in regard to item C1 in support. I'm Kim Dopel of 61 Forest Street, Subiaco, and I have been a resident and ratepayer of Subiaco since 1979, some 41 years, more than most people living in Subiaco. I was there in Roberts Road when Richard Diggins first stood for council and was elected partly with my support. And I also remember singing along with Mayor Costa at Rocco's restaurant in Subiaco some 20 years ago. The City of Subiaco appointed me in the mid-80s to be their Main Street architect, where I provided design service to shop owners on behalf of the council to improve the look of them and also to create a sense of place in the main streets. I was also awarded 2 design awards by the council for making a significant contribution to the built form of Subiaco. SAT approvals fuel the state government in taking away more control and taking further ownership and decision-making from local government. SAT was never intended to be the primary decision maker. You, the elected members, are, and you have the responsibility to support your own town planning framework. The applicant has provided a comprehensive and unequivocal legal opinion that clearly points out the validity of the proposal under the current lawful planning framework, that being Local Planning Scheme number 5, the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan, and the State Planning Policy 7.3, R Codes Volume 2 for multiple dwellings. And they guide planning outcomes for Subiaco for the next 20 years. The SACP was initiated by the City of Subiaco, was widely canvassed with exhaustive community involvement, gaining their support. The council approved, resulting in the council approving the town centre plan. You have an application before you tonight that has design excellence and a recommendation for approval by the City of Subiaco administration. It is in accordance with all relevant lawful planning requirements. I ask you to support this application in accordance with the law and allow the 5 dwellings to be constructed. Thank you.
The next statement is from Ms. Janine Marsh of Forest Street, Subiaco.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Taylor and councillors and staff. I'm Janine Marsh, a resident and business owner and ratepayer of Subiaco for over 30 years, and I've lived in Forest Street for 15. 51 Forest Street falls under the Town Centre Zone B and is not just a residential zoning. It is a own unique legal planning framework which includes the SACP, which its intent was to provide a vision and long-term framework for ongoing revitalisation of the town centre. It was created through extensive community engagement process involving residents and business owners. The implementation of the SACP should not be controlled by recent resident pressure to change the already agreed plan vision of the town centre. There was opportunity before. 76% of the comments in the advertising period were in support of our project, which included many business owners who want to desperately see this vision enacted within the town centre for its survival. As a small site and its street location, it does not warrant an LDP as clearly outlined by the city's planners and our planning lawyers. The two properties to be considered in the planning review that we've supplied extensive information are 420 Barker Road. The council and we have demonstrated that there is no major overshadowing and no overlooking impacts. This was the case, and we did not explain it to the neighbours, but we have on 2 occasions since tried to, and sadly they've not taken it up through the strata manager. At 47A and 47B Forest Street, the setbacks at the other level comply. The 2 setbacks at the front are greater than needed, and at the rear it is also greater. At the lower level, we are allowed to have nil on the boundary, except where there's windows or openings. We have shown by overshadowing data that there is no impact whether it's 4 to 5 or 6 to 7 stories, and whether there's a nil setback or 3 metres at the respective openings, as the neighbours' wall has at 6.4 metres creates the majority of the overshadowing. Overlooking, there are no issues, and we've also increased the required heights of the upper level screens. We've developed 5 apartments instead of 10 to 12, and it's been based on age in place for my parents to be able to live with us. I do not want my parents to live in an aged care home, particularly with the ongoing pandemic issues. If we compare LPS 4 to LPS 5, under LPS 4, the maximum allowable height was 15 metres. Under the SACP, it is 15.5 at the lower levels and an extra 2 levels above. So now, after 20 years of planning schemes, I do not think that all the public consultation and planning behind the SACP was only to raise the height by 500 millimetres in 20 years. Therefore, the extra 2 levels at the top, which only represent 35% of the overall site and not seen for the street, allow for this intended future growth of the town centre. Our lawyer has clearly defined that heights, not stories, are the main determination under the SACP, and also defined the building volume for allowable development. Our design has shown minimal impact to the neighbours. It would be challenging to find reasons for refusal.
Our next statement is from Mr. Craig Williams of Hensman Road, Subiaco.
Mayor Taylor, councillors and staff. I've been a ratepayer in Subiaco since 1988 and lived in Hensman Road since 2013. I'm a retired engineer and army officer. I'm not a developer, not a town planner, and I am personal friends of the principals of Dopel Marsh. I lived in Sydney for many years and I've seen there many appalling residential developments and their adverse consequences on community. However, I live next door to many quality developments and experience the benefits to community associated with that quality. I adore the heritage character of Subiaco in general and implore Council to continue to strive to preserve this. Council's planning instruments, which nominate areas for greater development, with the area around 51 Forest Street being one such area. Sadly, we see the decay and degradation of our commercial strips of Rockaby and Hay. And similarly, I encourage Council to do all it can to reinvigorate those areas. Reinvigoration would be contributed to by greater population, and for that part, Council should encourage well-designed developments in suitably selected and zoned areas in order to generate greater Subiaco population. The proposed 51 Forest Street development has been assessed as having design excellence through Council's processes and is well compliant with Council's development guidelines and constraints and zoning. It is located close to the transport hub of Subiaco railway station and targets a very appropriate demographic as residents. It has all the features of a quality development. It's also in an area where sadly the heritage character has been diminished over the years and is presently a hodgepodge of uses and built form. So it's an area that is very much prime for well-considered redevelopment. Approval of this particular development would serve to encourage other quality developments and provide reinvigoration of our community without denigration of wider heritage precincts. Conversely, rejection of the application would indicate to developers that irrespective of compliance and quality of a development, they're at grave risk of added costs and delays or failure of an otherwise suitable development proposal. This would dissuade developments which our community needs for its reinvigoration. In summary, the proposed development is recognised as having design excellence, so is of the right quality. It's in the right area and the right zoning. It will serve to make a small contribution.
Thank you. Our next statement is from Mr. Graham Taylor of Forest Street, Subiaco.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, councillors and staff. My name is Graham Taylor. I've owned 57 Forest Street, Subiaco for 39 years. Prior to that, I've owned another property in Subiaco for a further 4 or 5 years prior to that. I can also say in relation to SAP, I've never received one letter, not even one letter, from council informing me as a ratepayer as to the process of SAP. I also have properties in other councils and they always write to me with rezoning proposals, but I haven't had this benefit to me and therefore I've had no input whatsoever. But getting back to my statement, I've regularly maintained the property as my own. It's been my office as I previously mentioned. It was fully refurbished internally in 2017. I'm opposed to the above-mentioned DA for 51 Forest Street for the following reasons. 1, the DA is overbearing, having a 15.5 metre boundary parapet wall, total height of 21.5 metres, which will obstruct morning sun, cause overshadowing to our property, solar panels and cause increased dampness in our rear car park. 2, the boundary-to-boundary 7-storey DA is totally overwhelming for Forest Street, which as you know is only 2.6 metres wide in part where the Moreton Bay fig tree is. There's no right-of-way or rear laneway access, very limited street parking. Compare this to if amalgamated blocks of 1,000 square metres with graduated buildings and side setbacks happened to be a requirement of SACP, then this would not only respond to element objective 0221 of the R codes, responding to the character of the street and local area, including existing buildings that are unlikely to change, such as nearby strata complexes or my Federation building. But it would also minimise the risk of structural damage caused by excavation for footings, car stackers and the like. This would have had the benefit of windows and light along the length of the proposed DA on each side, making it far more attractive than blank dark walls on the lengths of the building DA as it stands. This would have been a far better alternative than ending up with high density development in inappropriate locations, a concern raised in the West Australian newspaper, which I've previously sent to councillors. In terms of the DA, what prevents a buyer from buying a floor to be used as commercial office, which would result in conflicted use and insufficient parking? Even if it was aged for care on each of the 5 levels,
Our next statement is from Mr. Peter Garside of York Street, Subiaco.
I'm a long-time business owner of 34 years and resident of Subiaco for 22 years, who is very concerned about Subiaco's further deterioration, and therefore we need to encourage good designs such as this project, especially with design excellence, to bring back activity and help both retail and commercial operators survive with ongoing new investment into Subiaco. We do not want Subiaco to go the way of Fremantle, that was a no to development that killed it over the 12 years until people woke up that they needed development to sustain the city. The councillors approved a new design review panel in February this year. So why are the councillors voting against their appointed experts' advice? What qualifications does the block of councillors against development have to make judgments against the design recommendation for approval by the professional staff? I object as a long-time ratepayer that these rates are being unnecessarily spent to defend councillors' decisions disapproving applications that have been recommended for approval for legal fees incurred at SAT. This money could have been spent on improving the marketability of Subiaco, in encouraging new retail traders, plus community activities. As said, this is a sort of project that is needed in Subiaco, meets the guidelines of the Subiaco Activity Centre, wide community approval and recommended for approval, so why not approve? Thank you.
Our next statement is from Ms. Diane Russell of Forest Street, Subiaco.
Good evening, Mayor Taylor, Deputy Mayor, Councillors and City of Subiaco staff. I, Diane Russell, purchased my property at 47A Forest Street in January 2007 as my lifetime residence and renovated it at substantial cost to myself and considered this to be my age in place. When I became aware of this development application being lodged, I called City of Subiaco Planning on the 18th of February to view the plan, but was told I would have to wait until the 21st of February. I again asked if I had, as I had back in February 2017, when the applicant purchased 51 Forest Street, if any changes had been made to the existing town centre 4-storey height, and was told that I had nothing to worry about as it remained at 4-storey. Hence my shock on viewing the plan and seeing that it was 7 stories. I rely on light from the western wall arch window and the large stairwell window to illuminate the living space and bedrooms in my home, and I can guarantee you there will be no afternoon winter sun reflected off this massive 15.5 western boundary wall abutting my property. I challenge the design review panel expert and planning services to guarantee me otherwise or demonstrate to any reasonable person how this would otherwise occur if this DA is approved. I met with the applicant on the 20th of July at her request and was told that there was no need for my consultant architect to attend, as only she would be attending, but her principal architect also attended the meeting. I said that I was happy to work with her and was willing to compromise for a harmonious outcome as we are neighbours. I suggested a reduction in height and a side setback to my eastern boundary wall, but my concerns were not considered and there was no further outcome. The prospective images presented by the applicant show a row of up to 22.5 metre boundary-to-boundary developments along Forest Street. This does not reflect the existing streetscape of Forest Street, nor does it show my double-storey unit or single-storey 100-year-old building house at 51 Forest Street. How can this DA, squeezed on a 504 square metre lot, be considered design excellence and a good outcome for street appeal, and at the same time disregard the R codes required for adjoining properties? The foundation of my existing 5 metre boundary western wall only has a 1 metre foundation and is currently supported in place by steel structure beams with structural damage by the DA boundary parapet wall and development, as well as potential damage to my courtyard area and swimming pool. I would like to say to councillors and the applicants that if this DA is approved and goes ahead, please think of my 87-year-old mother, Esma, at her age in place at 47A Forest Street in the future, where her bedroom sitting room window will be looking out onto a 15.5 metre large masonry grey wall and never having the pleasure of a light-filled room or seeing blue sky again. I appeal to the...
Ms Russell, if you can just bring your comments to a close, please.
I appeal to the City of Subiaco councillors' moral and social conscience to do the right thing and not vote for this flawed DA, which I believe has nothing to do with age and place and everything to do with money. Thank you.
Our next statement is from Mr Michael Hode of Bagot Road, Subiaco.
Mayor Taylor, councillors, staff, I'm here to support, I'd like to make a statement in support of 51 Forest Street. Reason being that we have a town planning scheme to most intents and purposes. As I understand it, this development complies. There's not much point having a town planning scheme if we don't follow what we have. It's unfortunate that other people, obviously, when developments take place, become concerned. I see this generally throughout the area. Often when these things are done and more of them happen, people become more accustomed to them. But this development is better than many of them. You could have had a lot more units offered within the development according to the scheme. Forest Street itself is a street which, as Mr Williams mentioned, has not a great deal of character to it. It's been mucked around with over a long period of time, and as a result there is a conglomeration of all different sorts of styles of architecture in the area, none of which it will be, in my opinion, diminished by the current building, which has an acknowledgement of its excellence. And I think it's a situation that we have to acknowledge that time moves, and as was mentioned by another speaker, it is 20 years since the town planning scheme has been changed, and these things are supposed to happen every 5 years. They're supposed to be addressed. So I think we've just got some catching up to do, and certainly a new development in Subiaco, which unusually is not of little pokey units, but offers a facility which is much better and would be a lot better in terms of parking, because I believe you're going to have less demand on parking rather than more because of the number of units going in there. Council does have certain concessions which is indicated it's willing to use in the past, namely a particularly large development at the bottom end of Rockaby Road, which is astonishingly large, brought about by major concessions made by council. So it seems to me that if, you know, the concessions any concession that's asked for in this building, I think is minimal by contrast with that, and that has claimed to have been a great success in terms of public acceptance of it. And always people are going to be concerned with dilapidation as a result of development in the area, and that is the job of the builder and the developers to resolve any situation that may arise from that. But otherwise, if we worked on that basis, we'd never redevelop anything. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. We have reached the end of our public statement time. Just before, though, we move on to the next one, I understand we have a couple of petitions coming forward. So what I'll be doing is I'll take the petition for this item that most of our statements have been on, item C1, 51 Forest Street. And then I understand that there may be some community members gathered outside regarding the petition for in respect to Whole Food Circus. So I'll do the 51 Forest Street one first, and then we'll do the Whole Foods one.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Yes, I was just given a small petition in regard to the 7-storey construction of residential development at 51 Forest Street. There are only 4 signatures on that, and it looks like there's another mini survey on the same matter with different questions and answers I'll present to you. Thank you.
I'll just read it out for the avoidance of doubt. The petition against the proposed demolition of existing commercial building and construction of a 7-storey residential development at 51 Forest Street, and it has 4 signatures on that one. And then, as Councillor Rowe pointed out, the second item is a survey. Thank you. Okay. So I understand we have another petition, Councillor Mansfield.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Taylor.
So, sorry to interrupt. I just know that people had been waiting outside, and I was just wondering if someone could please let those community members know. I'm not sure if they're still there. I just know when I came in, there was a number of people waiting to hear the matter, and due to social distancing requirements, they kind of took turns of coming in. Nope, they've gone. Okay, just want to check.
Yeah, look, thank you, Mayor Taylor. I do want to present a petition that has collected 1,874 signatures, and I understand that it's still rising. The petition was presented to me on behalf of Ms. Rachel Torre of the Whole Food Circus. And the substance of the petition is to reinstate the car bays on the northern side of Nicholson Road between Hensman Road and the laneway. 2, make the laneway no exit to Nicholson Road and increase the safety to all road users. And 3, to allow Whole Food Circus Cafe to build an alfresco street deck adjacent to the front of our shop without a 2.5 metre concrete curb. So I will present that petition to you. I did foreshadow asking 2 questions on the matter. Am I able to do that?
Yeah, I understand staff have prepared answers to those questions if you'd like to say those questions, and Acting CEO, will you be answering those? Director Millard will answer them. Quite often we get questions from time to time on different matters, such as your question now. This is about a petition that's being presented to council, of which notice was given to council. So let's just hear the questions and the answers, and we'll take the petition.
Obviously, I'm very happy for these questions to be taken on notice, but there were 2 questions that I wanted to ask. The first was, when will the actions outlined in the email on the 27th of July, and including an investigation into the streetscape upgrade to Nicholson Road between Hensman and Rosalie Streets that will consider traffic calming, parking compliance, and opportunities to incorporate soft landscaping and or other treatments to enhance the area, be complete and presented back to council? And my second question is the city offering any short-term interventions between now and when the above investigations are complete?
Thank you. Director Millard.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In regards to question 1, City officers will present the outcomes of the investigation and potential options to an elected member's strategic workshop in September 2020. The workshop will also cover the next steps in the process, including community consultation. In respect to question 2, the existing no stopping restrictions in this area are in place to ensure the safety of all motorists using Nicholson Road and the associated side streets and laneway. Short-term interventions are not possible until the proposed streetscape upgrade investigation has been completed. The City will monitor and manage the situation with normal parking compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. So councillors will now move to item 8 on our agenda this evening, confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. Our first item of minutes is the ordinary council meeting of the 21st of July 2020, and that we move that they are a true and correct record. Do I have a mover and a seconder for those minutes, please? Thank you, Councillor Jennings. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor De Vries. Yep. Sure, that's on item 8.2, I'm pretty sure. So we're at 8.1. So, councillors, we've got a mover and a seconder for 8.1 to confirm the minutes. I'll be calling the vote, and I think this will be properly done. Okay, with our electronic voting system. Okay, so I'd like to call the vote on the minutes, please. Mr. Bentley, can you please assist Councillor McMullen? Yep, that's worked. Thank you. And so the minutes are carried 10-1. So, Councillor Stroud, as to your question regarding 8.2, that was what the email was circulated about around allowing those minutes to be finalised and be brought back to the next council meeting. So my suggestion, unless anyone has a burning desire to move and second them, is that we let them lapse and make sure that that's finalised. So 8.2 is lapsed. Thank you. So, councillors, we're now at item 9, announcement by the presiding member without discussion. And I'd just like to welcome you all. And we just did our voting for the first time in person in an ordinary council meeting since March. So, welcome back to hopefully returning to normal operations. And as has already been announced, and some of you may have been wondering how you look on the little or big screen, our live streaming is up and running. And so if anyone's tuned in and listening to this, thank you for participating in the process. We'll be working hard this evening. Now, a couple of matters I wanted to share with all. On the 1st of August, we held our first citizenship since January, where we welcomed 26 new citizens who reside in our community. Our newest citizens came from a variety of nations, and it was a really beautiful ceremony held in Rankin Gardens in the Rose Garden. It was quite a lovely morning. And another event of note was that we recently celebrated National Tree Day, where local residents and staff planted over 3,500 seedlings in a new hydrozone garden bed at Lake Julbup. Our council is really leading the way in water-wise gardens and the way that we do native plants, and it's a credit to our team. Acting CEO, if you could please pass that on to all involved. It was a very lovely community event. And that's about it. We have a long meeting and I'm sure we need to make some important decisions tonight. One of our biggest decisions for the year, of course, is the budget, and I will probably say more on that once we've passed it. But it is a big thing for our council, and we have a lot of important decisions to make this evening. So, councillors, I'm just up to reports of officers and just double checking what the impartiality declarations mean for our en bloc motions. Councillor De Vries?
Right, it's not working. Yeah. To remind you, I want to remove D2 from en bloc. Thank you.
I haven't forgotten. So, for the information of the public gallery, it is intended that a number of recommendations presented to this meeting will be grouped together and passed en bloc. As no amendments or alternative motions have been received from elected members for these recommendations. I'll now ask the meeting whether there are any other agendas to be withdrawn from the en bloc vote. I note we have Councillor De Vries wanted D2 out, and C7 was, I think, the impartiality item, and the budget had already been removed due to requiring an absolute majority. So I've removed D2 and C7. So do I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mansfield. I think I should have a show of hands, Councillor Hammersley, for the seconding. Okay, so I'd like to call the vote on the en bloc vote, please. So the motion is carried 11-0. Thank you, councillors. Now, I understand you wanted to speak to D2, and I'm not imagining this as contentious. I'm just keen to get to the one that the gallery is interested in. So D2, Disability Access and Inclusion Plan. We have the officer's recommendation that the report be received. We're on page 8. Oh, my apologies, I do need glasses. Page 5 of our agenda. Councillor De Vries. Are you looking to move it?
Yes.
Yeah. Do I have a seconder for the item? Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Councillor Davis. It's early in the night. Councillor De Vries.
Oh, it's working now. I'd like to draw the attention of Council to the work by City staff done to improve services and create opportunities for the disabled members of our community. As presiding member of the Disability Access and Inclusion Committee, I'd also like to publicly acknowledge and welcome the presence of new committee members, Lisa and Ashley Odgers, at the July meeting. Ashley, as a resident with a disability, made an invaluable contribution to the committee, and in turn it was evident that he enjoyed participating in the meeting. This meeting was a chance to address the issue of concern for all about the importance of the need for social housing in our community. Ian Shields from Home Hub gave a very informative presentation on the work he is doing to provide housing for the disabled. Committee member Chris Barty from Mission Australia was also able to highlight some of the changes to the NDIS and possible support opportunities. This discussion about social housing was very relevant to the current pressures on many in the community, and also enabled a member of the community who observed the meeting to engage with the presenters on issues of concern to him for his son's well-being. The Disability Access and Inclusion Plan annual report includes a number of key positives which I'd like to highlight. Number one is access and inclusion. The funding by the City of Subiaco in 2019 allowed VoiceWorks to host 9 concerts and to perform a concert in the Arts Centre. 22 of the 90 members identify as having a disability. This choir has offered significant opportunities to enhance the social and mental well-being of participants. Ashley Odgers, our newest committee member, participates in voice works and has spoken about the positive impact it has had on his life. The second point is information and communication. There will be opportunities for people with disability to have input on the design of the new city website. And committee members will be given the opportunity to test the site before it goes live. And the third and final point is the quality of service, consultation and engagement. People living with disability have the same opportunities as others in the community to engage in public consultation through access on the Have Your Say Subiaco. There has been a significant increased use of the online Have Your Say website. I commend this report to Council.
Thank you. Any further speakers on the item? If not, I'll call the vote then, please. All those in favour? So the item is carried 11-0. So councillors, we now move to C1, number 51 Forest Street, Subiaco. It's on page 24 of your agendas. We have the officer's recommendation. My apologies, I've got page 19. I've got it written in two different places, two different numbers. It's not on me. So on the agenda, which we should all have in front of us, C1, page 19, the officer's recommendation begins on page 19 and continues for several pages to page 24. We have the officer's recommendation that the application be approved. Do I have a mover and a seconder for this item? Councillor Mansfield? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Davis, thank you. Councillor Mansfield, and I do note we have an alternate from Councillor Jennings. Councillor Mansfield, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. I have spoken on this before, so I will try and keep it brief and avoid repetition. For me, the assessment of this application really does go to the heart of our role as councillors and our obligation to assess development applications against the relevant planning frameworks. It's our role to judge this application on its planning merits and against our very own planning frameworks, our own instruments, which is the LPS 5, the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan, as well as the Residential Design Codes Volume 2. We're being asked to consider a development application which has been assessed and revised in conjunction with our own independent expert design review panel, and which our own planning staff have recommended for approval. Councillors, this is a compliant development application. We don't need to get hung up on the need for a local development plan because we know that one's not required. There's no need to get concerned about whether the development is expressed in stories or metres because the overall height of 21.5 metres is 1 metre less than what's permitted under the LPS 5. There's no need to worry about non-compliance relating to ground floor use as there is no ground floor residential dwelling proposed. We don't need to worry about plot ratio because the development is only proposing 5 dwellings. We can also take comfort in the fact that our staff have recommended the inclusion of a dilapidation report in the conditions, and they've also included a condition requiring a schedule of materials, colours and textures and finishes prior to issuing a building permit. This is the first major site to be developed in line with the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan, and I certainly do acknowledge the concerns of neighbouring residences that this will be a building of a larger scale. But the city's planning strategy and framework supports increased height within the town centre, and the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan was the subject of widespread community consultation, as was LPS 5. These are our own planning instruments. We devised them. They were devised not only in consultation with our community, but with input from elected members and planning staff. In my opinion, there's been a conflation of the concerns that councillors may have in relation to provisions provided for under the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan and the LPS 5 and the assessment of this current development application. This applicant should not be penalised for lodging a compliant development application just because some of us might not agree with the allowable development provisions and the discretions which are permitted under the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan and the LPS 5. I would suggest that if you have issues with those instruments, there are other ways to deal with them, but rejecting this compliant development application is not the way to do it. There are no valid planning grounds upon which to reject this DA. Please consider your obligation as elected members to assess this development application on its planning merits. Please listen to what our independent design review panel have recommended. Their sole reason for being is to promote design excellence across the city of Subiaco. Please take note of the feedback that's been provided to elected members over the last week. Please heed the input of our planning staff. This is a planning decision. Do not penalise this applicant for issues that you might have about what's permitted under the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan and the LPS 5. I would ask you to support this compliant application.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. Yes, I suppose, reiterate some of the things that I said the last time we discussed this back on the 9th of June. And look, it's interesting. It's not often we get an opportunity to revisit a decision, or in this case, a non-decision. And I hope that tonight we can make, as a council, a unemotional and proper and sensible decision, given that we've had a long time with all the facts in front of us. When we last discussed this in June, at that time, I didn't personally hear a compelling reason, a compelling planning reason to ignore staff advice and refuse the application. Since that time, the application itself hasn't changed, and since that time, the advice that we've been given and the report that we've been given by staff hasn't changed. So in that sense, and from that perspective, my attitude towards it hasn't changed. It was supportable then, and it's supportable now. And I come back to this. This proposal, which is a modest proposal for 5 apartments, is consistent with all of the levels of the planning framework and controls for the site. It's consistent with our strategy. It's consistent with our town planning scheme. It's consistent with the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan, and it's consistent with the Volume 2 of the Residential Design Codes. So I suspect if you find yourself in a position where you can't support this proposal, then your issue or your concern probably lies with the planning framework and not with the proposal itself. And I think we should be careful that if you're in that situation, you should consider that your energies should lie in perhaps revisiting that planning framework and not penalising the applicant for being the first cab off the rank, so to speak, and lodging what is a compliant development. The applicant, look, from personal experience, it's a very difficult thing to achieve or to obtain a recommendation for approval from planning staff in many local governments. There's many hoops you have to jump through. There's a rigorous DRP process which the applicant has gone through. The report itself from the planning staff is clear. It's exhaustive, and it's very clear to me that it's supportable. And look, I just remind perhaps the councillors of some of the facts around the matter, going back to the idea of taking emotion out of this and pulling back to making a planning decision. The overall building height is 1 metre lower than is permissible. The plot ratio for the site is almost 5% less than permissible. The rear setback of the building is 1.5 metres greater than required. And it is physically impossible to cast a shadow to the east or the west at midday on any day of the year. Look, I think I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Speaker against the motion? No one's wished. Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. Well, I'm very interested to hear that this is a complying development application. It's been said over and over again, and I'm wondering why it's even here in this room if that's the case. Clearly it's not a complying development application, otherwise we would not be being asked to make this decision. Now, we do need to be unemotional and we do need to be proper, no doubt about it. This is a statutory process. This is a legal framework that we are working in, and we have to make what is called a quasi-judicial decision. Now, quasi-judicial decisions are based on law and on facts. And facts are only facts when they're brought into the decision maker's realm with evidence. So that's where we're at. And what we're trying to do here, as has been pointed out, is make the first decision about this document, which our community has put a lot of effort into. What I would like to see in our decision making and in our general interface is that we say what we mean and we mean what we say. They're the best relationships to have. So, what did we say in this document? It's very clear, it's all set out, and one of the big technical questions that we have to confront as decision makers tonight is the legal meaning of the word height. Now, that is something that we've all sought information and advice upon. We've got some. We've asked for some advice that wasn't forthcoming. Having said that, when you look at Forest Street on page 19 of the Activity Centre Plan, what do you see? You see a vision. The vision is that there will be 4-storey buildings and that they will interface with the street as 4-storey buildings. There is one exception, and that is I think it's the Subiaco Village site, which is set for 6 stories now. So we've got everybody's 4 stories and they're 6. They are a special site, and there's a whole lot of stuff that applies to them that doesn't apply to anyone else. Each of those areas have the opportunity to come to council and ask for 2 additional stories. Now, we heard at the Agenda Briefing Forum about this question of stories, and we were told, don't get hung up on that, don't worry about that. Well, that really got my curiosity going, and I thought, is this some weird Subiaco thing, this story business? Well, as a little bit of investigation shows, it's not. You can go and look at the City of Vincent's Planning and Building Policy Manual and you'll find the same sort of approach. We did have some advice from our planning staff about what was the purpose of the use of stories. And what we were told is a little bit sketchy, but that an explanation was that it's about the interface of the buildings with the street and making our streets human scale and livable. So what we have here is a development application which has cleverly tried to squash 5 stories into what's meant to be 4. And they say it doesn't matter because it's the same height, but it's not the same appearance. And when you're walking down a street and you're interfacing with the building and you look up and you go, that's 4 stories, or that's 8 stories, or that's 24 stories, because you look at the stories and that's how you interact with them. So this decision is a very serious decision. Most decisions, well, all decisions have to be made on their merits, but This one has wide-reaching effects because we will be setting not a precedent, but because we are meant to make consistent decisions, the way we approach this will affect all of this plan. Can I just finish? Yep, I'll bring it to an end. So basically, I have not been able to be convinced that this development does comply, or that in its current form it ought to be approved. There is also some work to be done on the east side, and I think that with negotiation we can improve the building and everyone can have a better outcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker for the motion.
Mayor Taylor, I've listened with interest to the questions and the statements earlier and the debate so far. And I have to say that I speak to this motion with a sense of somehow being trapped in an alternate universe, a world with an omnipotent moon, a strangely discombobulated Doctor Who episode, or a combination of the lot. What else explains that an alternate refusal to what should be a straightforward approval is even being contemplated? And that there are councillors in this chamber tonight who, it appears, aren't prepared to back their own professional staff's comprehensive report and subsequent recommendation for approval, based on a sound assessment of the planning tenets applicable to the site and the DRP assessment that this proposal represents excellent design and a good outcome for the city. In my time on council, this is about as straightforward as it gets. Sure, there are some concessions being sought, but that is not unusual in Subiaco. Such concessions are contemplated by our very own planning documents and are not an obstruction to approval being granted, provided that it is demonstrated by the applicant and confirmed by our planners that they are supportable within the constraints set down and without duly affecting the amenity of the adjoining properties. This has clearly been demonstrated to be the case, and the proposal should therefore be supported without reservation. I understand that there are neighbours who aren't necessarily happy with what is proposed next door to them, but that should not cloud our judgment when we are assessing such an application. They own property in our town centre, and the council has, since 2012, been examining and forming the sort of vision we collectively hold for our centre. As a result of that consensus, we, as a council, approved both the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan and LPS 5. Be under no illusion, the application before us has arisen out of and complies with those very same documents. The most strident or loudest voice should not be a determinant. We are obliged as councillors to make our decision based on sound planning grounds, and the officer's report and recommendation for approval gives me great confidence that an approval is most apt in these circumstances. The applicants, who, may I remind you, are also long-term residents, ratepayers, business owners and employees in Subiaco, are, like others of their kind, intending to invest their hard-earned dollars into our wonderful city, injecting millions of dollars into the local economy and helping local businesses, both with the spin-off during construction and ongoingly with an increase in people living within our town centre. More people living closer to restaurants, bars and pharmacies mean more resilient businesses. This is the stated intention of the SACP that we as a council support, and which in any normal circumstances would be a guiding document providing a high degree of certainty to someone intending to invest in Subiaco and to those who live in and around the centre. We should also, in my opinion, not be kicking the can down the road with, as I've heard said on more than one occasion, it doesn't matter if it's refused, they'll just take it to SAT. It does matter to me. It should matter to other councillors, and it matters to our ratepayers. The recently released City of Perth inquiry has highlighted just such an attitude, with the inquiry's response being that, and I quote, there was no legal impediment to the plan's approval and the council did not consider it on its merits as it was obliged to under law. Prior to my time on council, I witnessed decades of such behaviour, with most refused developments ultimately either receiving approval or the proponent simply walking away in dismay and disgust. We should not fall into that pattern of behaviour. It typically costs the applicants tens of thousands of dollars and likewise our city and therefore our ratepayers. Over $200,000 spent on failed SAT appeals in the 2 years prior to the end of 2017. That fact is a travesty of justice, sound governance and good financial management. I hear a lot about listening to our community. But what we owe to all collectively in our community, every single ratepayer, every single resident and every single business person, is to pay close attention to our professional staff advice, to take heed of our own governing documents, to be lawful and fair, and to vote yes to this application for the sake of sanity and our city's future built form and prosperity.
Thank you. Speaker against the motion? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. There are 4 non-compliances, excuse me, that are in contention. Sorry, I don't know, I've got a croaky voice tonight. The building height, so that's 7 stories instead of 6. The street interface height, that is 5 stories instead of 4, although they are within the maximum height allowed in metres. The ground floor use and the side setbacks. The nil side setback on the eastern side will, in my opinion, have undue adverse impacts on the amenity of the eastern dwellings. The fix for this is compliance with the 3 metre major opening setback and the 3 metre setback at the 5th level as required under the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan. The other non-compliances are not amenity concerns or issues, but they go to meeting the intent and objectives of the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan and the maximum height requirements imported from that plan into LPS 5. The Activity Centre Plan intent is for a maximum 6-storey built form and a 4-storey street interface for that site. The ground floor use is not compliant with the Activity Centre Plan's intent for non-residential uses on the ground floor, which are for the purpose of creating diversity, activation and vibrancy, and in that contemplating retail, entertainment or commercial uses on the ground floor. Due to those non-compliances and their either amenity impacts or being inconsistent with the intent and objectives of the Activity Centre Plan, I can't be satisfied that it is appropriate to approve the application either under the LPS 5 discretionary criteria, having regard to the relevant matters under the deemed provisions, or that the side setback non-compliances won't have a significant adverse effect or undue impact on the eastern dwellings. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker for the motion? Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor. Looks like the debate was about to cease, so I thought we'd better say something at this point in time. Over the last number of days, I've had a bit more time and took up an invitation to visit the house on the east side of this development. It made me raise the question about design excellence and what those considerations should be. Are they limited to just the site and consideration, or are they also extended to neighbours as to how they address the neighbours' impact and amenity? The elephant in the room with this one really is the east side. I mean, the west side has got a setback of some sorts, maybe not fully compliant, but the east side is providing an impact on the ground floor and first floor outdoor living areas and general light. So I raised the question about that sort of amenity, not just sunlight, but just light, air circulation, impact, visual impact. Those sort of things are worrying me. So as you know, at the first meeting, I was away for a while. I came back and had a limited time to consider this one, and I voted to approve it on that occasion. I'm a bit torn at the moment. I don't want to sound like with some of the stories we've heard recently, but quite honestly, it's a very difficult situation. You know, ironically, the people being considered here on both sides of the fence, if you want to call it that, have known each other for years. They're long-term residents. I mean, this is a local government, and we're meant to be keeping our feet on the ground in regard to these things. And it's a very awkward situation, extremely awkward. Now, as been said already, this wouldn't be here in front of us if it was fully compliant. It's not fully compliant. And I'm not talking about corny things like height and levels. I'm talking about some other aspects of it. To give due credit to the applicant, they set back the north-east corner, which is where you would think you would set it back and give consideration. But when you visit the home on the east, you realise she would probably forego that. In fact, I know she would, in consideration for a setback outside her main living areas and her light areas. Sunlight coming in there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon the other day and heating up the appropriate hard surface floor, doing all the things that are, considerate. Everybody wants to bring up their family in these homes on both sides of the fence, age and place, as they say. But the elephant in the room is that east side. I just wonder whether mediation, I mean, there's been talk that there's going to be no likelihood of mediation, which is not an expensive outcome. We've done this for years, and we've managed to come up with a decent outcome. I wouldn't mind testing it. I'm just torn with this one. I wouldn't mind testing it in some mediation to see if there can be design elements changed to actually set back the mid-ground in the east side, those 3 metres, or somewhere near it. Because when you walk outside, when you're physically at that home and you walk outside and there's no relief at all, the wall is just straight up as it is. I know there's a wall there now, I know that, but there's such a thing as sky and light and air and all those other things that come with it. So I'm a bit torn. I wouldn't mind hearing some other people debating to see what's going to happen with this one. Maybe it could be sorted out at mediation. I'd love to think it could be without incurring all the costs. That might be dreaming because it will have some design impacts that may be difficult to take on board. So I'll just leave it at that for the moment. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, is the matter that Councillor Rowe just raised in relation to the eastern neighbour a valid planning concern? Thank you.
Acting Manager for Planning Services.
Through you, Mayor Taylor, if you could just repeat the question.
Sorry. Is the matter that I've got a minty in my mouth. Is the matter that Councillor Rowe just raised in relation to the eastern neighbour and their potential loss of daylight a valid planning consideration?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. In relation to the eastern boundary, obviously in the officer's report, it's been outlined that they're seeking a variation where the setback is required to be 3 metres, and in considering anything other than that, being closer to the boundary, we have to satisfy that it has no undue adverse impact on the amenity of adjoining properties. So that's been discussed in the report, and it is a valid planning consideration.
And just as a point of clarification, it's come up a couple of times about this application and why it's come to council for a decision. This has come to council for a decision because it can't be made under delegation due to the number of submissions received during the public consultation. So that's why it's come to council for a decision. So I've had speakers for and against, so I'm looking to anyone who'd like to speak to the motion. I think we're a little out of order now, but that's okay. Any other councillors wishing to speak to this motion before I look to closing and calling the vote? Councillor McMullen.
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. I sense this is a matter which might come down to a vote of about 6-5. The question is which way is it going to go? As councillors would know, and in fact as staff would know, and as even the applicant would know, because I've spoken with her, there's been two questions on my mind which going into this meeting were likely to mean the difference between a vote for or a vote against from me. I needed to be satisfied of two things. The first thing I needed to be satisfied of was what is the purpose underlying the height controls in the Subiaco Activity Centre plan, which are carried through to LPS 5. The second thing I need to be satisfied is, once we establish that purpose, is that purpose being satisfied by the application in front of us? Now, to me, this is a question of fact and law. From staff, I sought some confirmation on evidentiary matters as to what might have been the purpose that was going through Council's mind in 2016 when they actually approved the height controls. Because it's one thing to be told in 2020 what the applicant or their lawyer thinks about Council's purpose back in 2016, but it's another thing to actually find out what that purpose was. Now, thank you to staff for looking through the archives and going back to 2013 and 2016. You've found some things which have given me a bit more insight, but the thing that's missing at this point is an opinion from a solicitor. We heard Belinda Morich make some pretty compelling submissions at the briefing last week. But the thing is, as a decision maker, we don't make decisions based on what other parties' lawyers say. We make decisions based on what our advisors tell us. So I've asked for a legal opinion to help me in my decision making. I unfortunately haven't got it. So whilst I accept that the purpose behind the Subiaco Activity Centre plan may be to prescribe physical building envelopes, there's still other potential purposes and interpretations in the back of my mind which haven't been laid to rest. The way I see it, it's quite possible that the height controls are to the effect that you can build up to 4 stories and 15.5 metres as of right, and if you satisfy all the criteria, you can have an extra 2 stories. By my count, that results in height controls of 6 stories and up to 22.5 metres, but it doesn't add up to 22.5 metres and 7 stories. It's just not in the framework as far as I can see. That's not to say that I'm right, and when I sit here as a councillor, I don't try and reach opinions on legal questions. And ultimately, I think we probably haven't seen the last of 51 Forest Street. And look, if it ever comes before me again and I've got an independent view that says that yes, I can legally make the decision, everything else is going to fall by the wayside. But unfortunately, I think it was today, I was told that the city says that I don't need legal advice. As a councillor, I was quite surprised to hear that, but that's what came back, and as a result, I can't vote for the application this evening. Having said that, I also won't be voting for any alternatives for refusal. So where does that leave the applicant? Well, they may, if they don't get a decision, probably still have a non-approval, which in effect gives them the option of SAT or possibly another bite at the cherry. And if there's a few stubborn councillors like myself who can be satisfied of the last remaining issues that might be eating at them, then maybe we won't find ourselves in SAT at all. If we do, then it seems that Councillor Rowe's quite open to mediation, and I'm sure he's not the only one. So I look forward to hearing the rest of the debate, and it's a bit of a shame that I can't vote to approve the application, but I think we all agree that we need to make valid and lawful decisions, and it's up to us to ask for and receive whatever confirmation we think is necessary. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be supporting, but I'm also not going to be refusing this application tonight.
Speakers for or against? Councillor DeVries.
I think I remember the first time I looked at this and spent many hours examining the issue, as I have done yet again. But it's interesting that I go back to the same issues on both occasions, that I look at the Subiaco Activity Centre plan and I wonder what the intention was when the discretionary clause 7.3 D, C2 was put in, and 7.D about non-compliance.
Councillor De Vries, if you can just direct your comments
That's
through. Can you hear me, Councillor De Vries? Yep. If you can just, as you're speaking, if you can direct it not to the gallery but to myself as presiding member, please.
Thank you, but I didn't see that was necessary. The discretions that are being sought for 51 Forest Street are framed as generally acceptable and beneficial. I don't know that anyone else directly looked at you, did they? Are generally acceptable and beneficial to the community, with explanations that any impact on the amenity of the nearby residents is minimal, intangible, or just don't exist. The report says that non-compliance is not likely to have undue adverse effect on the inhabitants of the area or the likely future development of the locality. In relation to the height discretion, clause 7.3C2, the report claims that the development will add to the vibrancy of the town centre and that the height discretions that are being sought are done so in terms of their contribution to the future character of town centre type B. However, I go back to this document. In discretionary clause 7.3C2, the SACP clearly states the power conferred by this clause may only be exercised if the local government is satisfied that non-compliance will not have an undue adverse effect upon the occupier or users of the development, the inhabitants of the locality, or likely future development. In my view, this brings a checks and balance. This is part of a check and balance as it strives to create a future vision for the city of Subiaco. It also allows for the current impact on the current residents. It is my opinion that the discretions could potentially have an adverse impact upon the inhabitants of the locality. I am not persuaded otherwise by the arguments presented. In fact, I have a view that when an impact on amenity is dismissed or ignored, then I should perhaps consider the matter even more. When amenity can bring tangible harm in real time, it is highly meaningful. And I believe that when the community seeks change, we should give equal weighting to the needs of the present against the needs for the future of Subiaco. I do, however, understand that there is a need for change, and I'm not averse to any kind of development which is compliant to the Subiaco Activity Centre plan. In my opinion, we cannot give greater weighting to the future while ignoring or minimising the needs of the present. I do agree with the deputation lawyer who said that the SACP is our document. It belongs to the community, and it is our way of charting a new future for the heart of Subiaco. It certainly wasn't written with the intention or implicit acceptance that change would be to the detriment of existing residents. It was, after all, a community consultative document. There are a number of indicators within the SACP that makes this clear. As our document, it is important that we also own the interpretation of the language within the document. We cannot cherry pick objectives to suit the needs of one and detract from the needs of another. It is, in my opinion, that the SACP is quite clear about its intention to engage with change in a positive way without ignoring the well-being of existing residents. I have therefore given this matter lengthy consideration, and again, as I said in my first debate, cannot support this development in its current form. However, I would be willing to consider if it was compliant in the terms of the 6 stories and the SACP, which has a variation of 2 stories. Thank you.
Other speakers for the motion or against the motion? This is your chance to speak before I put the motion to close into the vote. Councillor Powell.
Seems like everybody else has had a say. I may as well put my little bit in as well. Look, I really like the proposal being put forward by the applicants. I think it's a great idea for the residential block. But I'm afraid, despite all the arguments that I've heard before and since, and I agree with Councillor Mansfield, this is the first of its kind. It's important we get it right. And I'm still not convinced that we can actually do this. Height is obviously one of the matters that's under consideration. Now, I think in some ways we've been told that, you know, that the height is an either or. It can either be 7 stories or it could be 22.5 metres high. But I think it's more a neither nor, you know. It cannot be more than 6 stories, nor can it be more than 22.5. And to be compliant, it's got to be both. And it isn't. Look, I spoke before on this as well, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but I also have concerns about the amenity in regards to the light and the bulk, especially in regard to the eastern neighbour, and I have concerns about the ground floor and first floor heights and how that's actually going to appear as a streetscape if under the SACP the other ones are mixed commercial developments, you know, with very different floor heights. So, as I say, well, I think it's a very good idea, and I would like to be able to support it, but I think it's overreach, and I can't at the moment. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe. Councillor Stroke. My apologies, I've just bumped you up.
Thank you, Mayor. And I absolutely applaud the standard of debate tonight. I also very much welcome Councillor Rowe's considered thought, because both he and I were very much part of the formation of the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan back in 2012 and 13. I believe we probably understand what the intent was more than anybody else in this room. We were there, and we very much talked in terms of stories. But also, Councillor Rowe addressed the issue of the impact on the amenity of neighbours, and particularly the home on the eastern side. Now, I did not attend the home, nor did I take any phone calls from either side of this debate. I very much relied on the documents that were provided to me. And it's very much a circular argument, because you go from the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan to the town planning scheme to the deemed provisions, and you go back to look at the discretionary clauses and so on. It has required a lot of work, and I believe we can see that in the debate tonight. But one thing's for sure, which both Councillor Rowe and myself have experience of, and that is the power of mediation and how it is possible to get a better design outcome. And tonight we've heard a question about how much money has been spent up to a certain date and so on. The question should be asked, how many developments have we achieved through mediation and got a better outcome? And both Councillor Rowe and I have been at those tables and achieved those better outcomes. And that's where I believe it needs to go, whether they sit down with neighbours and work it out on that level, or whether it goes through a pretty inexpensive SAT mediation. And there's a lot of SAT mediations that can be done before it ever hits a full tribunal hearing. I believe that's the way this design should go, this DA should go, and therefore we need to vote it down. Thank you.
Thank you. Under 4.7 and 4.8, I might join the debate, seeing everyone's had something to say. It's really hard to say something new, so mine will be short. It really does come down to the law, the planning law and the planning framework, rather than adjoining landowners, that influences our decisions. It is a question of law, but it is our decision to make. And so I don't agree with the points that we can't make a decision tonight. I actually think that's our job to make a decision tonight. We've been elected to do so, and while we all may not agree, we do have the information in front of us, and we're not expected to be experts in a variety of things that councillors or elected members are required to make decisions on. But one thing that is required is that we do need to make decisions, and in this case, we do need to make them on valid planning grounds, and we do need to take all the information on board and listen to all the submissions. And I think it's evident from hearing that discussion tonight that this has been considered by everybody here. So this will come down to what we see as what we want for our community. And while a SAT mediation might be something that councillors think is appropriate, I really think that we need to be mindful of what our job is, and it is a consideration of what it costs our ratepayers, whether they are general ratepayers who are not a party to this, or whether they're the very ratepayers who are directly part of this process. It is an expensive process to go through SAT, and it should not be done as a reason for why we can't make decisions ourselves. So that's all I have to add to it, and I'll look to Councillor Mansfield to close.
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. Look, before I close, I wondered if I could ask a question. It's a bit of a last-ditch attempt, but I was wondering whether there might be any input from the planning staff about whether there's any way to satisfy Councillor McMullen's need for further legal advice on this one.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Taylor. The city's planning staff have not considered that this application requires any necessary legal consideration or any legal advice to assist council in making that determination. If that was the case, we would have sought that during the assessment phase back in April or March or whenever it may have been. I guess in considering the application and we were satisfied it met the planning framework and it was entirely approvable within the planning framework, so the question of legality never came up. Separately, I know there was some discussion at the council meeting on the 9th of June where council didn't make a determination on this particular application, which there's some questions regarding the legal concerns and whether it was legally approvable. That is why the applicant went away to get their own legal advice, which was provided to elected members for information only. The city didn't feel a need to have that reviewed or otherwise, because going back to my point previously is that we never thought, we don't consider that any legal considerations that require any legal advice to assist council in making its determination. So, yeah.
Thank you. Look, I do want to thank councillors for the, I guess, the rigour with which we've all considered this item. It is a complex situation, and it is, I guess, the first cab off the rank in terms of assessing the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan and the higher order planning document, the LPS 5. There's about, I guess, four, objections that have been raised, and one of them is building height versus stories, the street interface level, the ground floor use, and also side setbacks. I won't read out the staff's comment on each of those four elements. They have provided a lengthy comment in the possible alternatives. Suffice to say, each of those can be addressed quite easily through the Subiaco Activity Centre Plan and also the LPS 5. So I guess as a result, I've not heard anything tonight to suggest that this application shouldn't be supported. It is a planning matter that we are here to decide and to discuss tonight. and that's the basis upon which we should really be making our decision. We have established an activity centre plan that sits underneath a local planning scheme. The applicant has taken these two documents and they have drafted a design for 5 dwellings. They've liaised with our design review panel on a number of occasions. It's kind of gone back and forward. And they have come upon a review that the staff have agreed is capable of support. If you put yourselves in their shoes, it would be quite disheartening to kind of get all that way after what's probably been, I think, up to 18 months in the making, and then for it to come to council for a final decision. And we are left with a choice tonight. And I would ask you to think about that choice very clearly. This is a planning decision. Please don't penalise this applicant for seeking the valid planning discretions that they are entitled to under our own planning instruments. Please support this application.
I'll call the vote on the officer's recommendation, please. So the motion is lost 4-7, and we move to Councillor Jennings' alternate. Councillors, you should have Councillor Jennings' alternate for refusal. That's on page 2 of possible amendments and alternative recommendations for our meeting. Councillor Jennings, I understand you'll be moving your alternate. Do I have a seconder for Councillor Jennings? Councillor Hammersley. Councillor Jennings, would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I will, but briefly, because the alternate is for refusal, but it's broadly on the grounds that I outlined in the debate on the main motion. And it comes down to the same grounds, that the building height, the setbacks, the ground floor uses, and the, what was the fourth one? Sorry. And the street interface. And those things being non-compliant, then it's an issue of discretion and the appropriateness of exercising the discretion to approve. And as I've already indicated, in my view, that discretion should not be exercised due to the requirements in the activity centre plan insofar as they're applicable to in respect of the non-compliances and in respect of the amenity impacts on the east side neighbour of dwellings, 2 dwellings there. So, I mean, I don't think I want to go into any more detail, and that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I'll also try to be brief. I would like to see a decision made tonight. I think that this matter does need to move to the next phase if there is going to be a next phase. The applicant needs to have a clear understanding of what is the next step. If we make no decision, we're just back in limbo land. I don't think that's helpful. The advantage of making a decision is that then they have the option to either choose to bring some different plans, or if they would prefer, there is the SAT route. Now, the SAT route has some advantages. Yes, it does cost $550 to file an application. However, once that occurs, you do have the advantage that in just about every circumstance, the SAT will order a Section 31 mediation. That provides an opportunity to go into a confidential, safe environment to have a discussion with the actual decision makers. Not with the decision makers' advisors, but with the actual decision makers. And this is the strange thing about our understandably expedient planning system. But, you know, this thing has been under consideration for over 2 years, and a massive amount of effort has been put in, and the building does have a lot of merit. And yet, on our first occasion, we had 6 days to consider this matter. Now, fortunately, we have had another chance, and I've certainly learnt a lot about the matter in that time. But I think we should make a decision. We should give the applicant that clear direction that they either bring something slightly different, or if they want to talk to us confidentially, we go to SAT, we have those discussions and see if we can't come out with an outcome that is acceptable. So I'll be supporting the motion.
Speaker against the motion, Councillor McMullen.
Thanks, Mayor Taylor. There's at least 2 reasons why I don't support this. The first is that it's not necessary. There was a deemed refusal last time this came through the council's chambers or our I suppose our computer screens, because we were meeting remotely at the time. And there's a deemed refusal now. So the suggestion that council hasn't made a decision to date is it's a little bit unhelpful, because an intention's been signalled twice, and if the applicant wanted to avail themselves of the SAT, then they could have done so a couple of months ago, but they can certainly do so now. The other reason I don't want to vote against the vote for the alternative motion is because I think it would be it would give the neighbours unfair hope that I'm somehow ultimately going to fall on their side. I've given this matter a lot of thought, and like I said in the earlier debate, it came down to 2 pretty discrete points. I still remain to be satisfied of about 1.5 of those points, so that might happen, and we might resolve things that way, but I just don't think it's necessary or indicative of my thoughts on this matter for me to be voting in support of this alternative motion. So it won't have my vote.
Speaker for the motion. Any other speaker? Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mayor Taylor. Look, I don't think we should opt out like that. It's important that you do populate a refusal, but I want to point out that, well, point 1B2 is very important, that it is in there talking about the amenity to the east. Look, I've got to give due credit. The applicant has gone a long way to design a fabulous building, albeit some neighbours are worried about the height and whatnot. But to me, it's the east ward amenity, maybe a little bit more in the west as well. I can't go about we're not architects, but if they can find it in themselves to try and address some of those sticky points, and it's in there, and I think it's important that it's in there. And this has been a successful, inexpensive way forward many, many times over the years. We just haven't used it so much recently. And to me, if that was addressed, I'd be very happy. I mean, the building is, as they say, it's under the height of, depending on definitions, it's set back from the rear more. I think they just missed the target a bit. And if you go into the building next door, you will see what's happened. The balcony on the north has a wall to the west. So the fact that their building would come up against that would make no difference to them at all, ironically. They're only going to get sunlight from the north. So that was a thing that I picked up when I went through the building. And as I mentioned earlier, the outdoor living is highly impacted just by the nearness of a wall. It doesn't have to be. We had that situation before, we might remember, down here in Dennis Street, I think it was. And it's an awful thing when you get a solid masonry wall hard up against all your living space. If you can just get a little bit of a gap, it allows for a bit of green, greening and that sort of thing. Maybe the lift in this design could be turned around, and that there's a little section on every floor that could be eaten into and provide a setback. I was looking at the plans carefully today. But anyway, that's up to the architects and the applicants to sort out. Thank you.
Further speakers on the motion? If there's no further speakers, I'll look to putting the motion to the vote. Councillor Jennings, would you like to close?
Just very briefly, yes, I do think that it's regrettable that it's after all the work that obviously the applicants have put in. So it's not about condemning their design. I think that it is a good design, but there is room for some improvement, particularly around the east side neighbours and the impacts on them. And I too feel pretty confident that if there is, if the applicants are of a mind to make some concessions, that there could be a very positive outcome for everyone. Thank you.
I'll call the vote, please, on the alternative to refuse. The alternative is carried 6-5. Councillors, it's now approximately 8 p.m. and we started at 5:30. I'll be calling a brief adjournment and we will adjourn now at 7:57 p.m. and I'd like us all to return to chambers, please, to resume decision making in 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, councillors, we have a number of important pressing decision. So let's resume our seats and get back to it. Councillors, we do need to get back on with it. I'm not sure where our other elected members are. This isn't a chat to the public time. This is a convenient stop between making decisions. Councillors, we're now resuming our meeting at 8:05 p.m. We are going on to item C5, review of wards and councillor representation on page 84. We have the officer's recommendation. Is it? Just give me one second. So, councillors, I just wanted to check. I just was checking if I was hearing feedback or if it was general chatting. So I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me clearly, and as we're being live streamed, it's coming across clearly. We have the officer's recommendation for the review of ward boundaries and elected member representation discussion paper is endorsed for the purposes of consultation, and that we give notice of our intention to undertake a review and invite public submissions. We're on page 77 of our agenda, and I note we have an alternative from Councillor Hammersley. Also, councillors, this item requires an absolute majority vote. Before I look to moving the motion, I will also point out, given that there was some debate, appropriate of course, and discussion at the agenda briefing around what was to be included or not, should councillors wish to move straight to Councillor Hammersley's alternative, we don't have to go through the first one first. We can go straight to the second one if the first one's not moved, just in case anyone through the last debate had forgotten how we can do these things. So, councillors, do I have a mover and a seconder for the officer's recommendation? Councillor McMullen, do I have a seconder for Councillor McMullen's officer's recommendation? If not, it'll lapse. It's lapsed. So the officer's recommendation has lapsed, and we move to Councillor Hammersley's alternative. So we have the alternative motion for C5 on page 10 of our possible amendments and alternative recommendations. Councillor Hammersley, I assume you'll be moving your motion. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Stroud. Thank you. Councillor Hammersley, would you like to speak to your motion?
I'll only speak very briefly because I think everybody's probably been following the discussion that's been happening since we had the agenda briefing forum. But really, it's really around just getting things to be as accurate and well, accuracy is the most important thing, but also eliminating opinion and influence from the document. And I also know that there are some councillors who have some interest in the 2 ward ideas, and if those people would like to liaise with the staff in that period that they've got, then that's another opportunity. I've given my more than 2 cents worth on what I'd like to see in terms of changes to the document. I think there are other people who probably have views, and this gives everyone about a week to get them to the staff so that the staff have a fair opportunity to work something up before the next agenda briefing forum.
Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you. May I just like to emphasise that the representation of our people, the number of wards and the number of councillors, I think is absolutely fundamental. Well, I know is fundamental to our grassroots democracy of local government, but we do have to get it right. I understand what the staff have done and where it's come from, but in the meantime, I think we've all brushed up on the Act and what the Local Government Advisory Board expects and so on. And I believe it's really important that we get all the right information out in a totally unbiased format, and we get on with this review, the public consultation and a decision on how many wards and councillors we should have. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers to the motion? Councillor Jennings?
I'm not sure that I'm speaking for or against at this stage. I did just want to acknowledge staff's work on this, and also that the document, the discussion paper, it does really reflect what councillors asked for at the workshop. So I mean that's acknowledged, and and as Councillor Stroud said, I think people just had a little bit more time to reflect, and so it's not a reflection for myself anyway. It's however I vote, it's not a reflection on staff's work or not having done the right thing, and I think staff really did, and it's just been there's been an evolution in terms of just, people have realised maybe we could just make it a little bit better, but it's no reflection on staff, and staff did prepare the document that was asked for after the workshop. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor McMullen.
Might just start with a question through you, please, Mayor Taylor, if I could. I'm just wondering what happens if we don't support the motion in front of us, given that we also didn't second the officer recommendation.
Then there's an ability for me to accept an alternate from the floor, or for myself to propose an alternate for council to consider, given the views of the room. Councillor Rowe, did you have your hand up? Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Meta. Just to reiterate that I think we should have all the options on the table. There's nothing worse than bringing it back and you haven't got everything there. So I'd just like to flag my support anyway for 2 wards and 4 councillors in each. That would be great if I could push that up. I'd love to see the report come back and there's no doubt, about what people want. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jennings?
A question, Mayor Taylor, just quickly. What, through you to staff, what is there any experience with, we have asked for an extension already from the local government or department or whoever administers this. What is the likelihood, do you think, that they're going to grant another extension, and or you just really can't say? Thank you.
Through you, presiding member, I don't think we could give an indication of what their consideration would be. We would need to go through the process. Last time we requested for an extension, they just needed to go through a process, consider that at the LGAB, and then responded to us, and they gave us the extension to January. In, I think, our officer's comments, if it wasn't in Councillor Hammersley's comments, was that if we can't get an extension, then what we would need to do is organise meetings in January to ensure that we could meet the deadline.
I'm just looking to see if anyone's putting their hand up. Under 4.7 and 4.8, I'll just make a couple of comments to the motion. I support this alternative because of the discussion around the 2 wards as an option, and looking at making sure that all possibilities in respect to wards and councillors are identified in the documents. So I was pleased that we were able to have something that covered that off. I don't know if I entirely support the reasons, and I kind of echo Councillor Jennings a bit, because reason 1, where it talks about political manoeuvring by politicians and public servants to impose their will on the electors, I really haven't seen any evidence of any politician or public servant imposing their will. Unfortunately, though, I have seen false submissions from community groups come in which did corrupt the process last time, and we really do need to get it right. We need our community to have certainty, and we need to have a robust process that we can all sort of hang our hats on. So I'll be supporting this alternative for those reasons. Any further speakers? If not, I'll look to ask Councillor Hammersley to close. You're happy? Okay, I'll call the vote then, please, on the alternative. So the motion is carried 10-1. So, councillors, we now come to item C6. The annual budget. We are on page 85 of our agendas. We have an officer recommendation that Council adopts the 2021 budget for the City of Subiaco with a number of points there. This one has not gone on block, obviously, because it's the budget and requires an absolute majority. So do I have a mover or a seconder for this one? I'll move it if someone, yeah, there we go. Okay, so Councillor Jennings and the Mayor. Councillor Jennings, would you like to speak to the budget? No? Okay. Well, I'll speak to the budget. This has been a budget that there has been a lot of thought and a lot of work put into. When we talk about things that happen at council, we often talk about things like planning frameworks or strategic frameworks or cascading documents and those types of things. But what we are in right now as a local government and as a state and as a nation and as part of a global entity, we are facing a pandemic. We are facing an unprecedented situation, and that goes from every level down to local government. And really where local government has an important role is to really look to supporting our community through civic leadership and through demonstrating to our community that in times which are difficult and in times of certainty, although we, and let's be honest, may not always know exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to happen, but by communicating clearly and by being decisive and by looking at ways we can help our community, whether it's through appropriately spending money in support or appropriately restraining the spending of money or appropriately changing the way we do reserves. And that is what I see in this budget, and it's come about through the hard work of staff. So thank you, Acting CEO. I know through your role as Director of Corporate Services, this is one of your main tasks of the year. And to all the staff involved and to councillors as well, providing feedback and clear direction to our administration around what we wanted to see. And I think those things around where we, oh wow, 5 minutes. I think those things are reflected in this budget, and it's a budget that I think we all should be proud to take to our community. So I commend it to you. Oh, there you go. So the seat is fair. Further speakers, Councillor Rowe.
Look, thanks very much. And yeah, I want to congratulate all the councillors for being so willing to do what the state government's basically asked us to, but it's been done for our community, the city of Subiaco. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I'm going to take the opportunity to raise that we've done our thing here in response to what the state has asked, and we're very willing to do it. But the state government has still got commercial businesses. Most of the buildings, or a lot of the buildings, are empty and trying to survive. For those that are not empty, in the form of heavy land tax and water rates. So the rate they apply on the same basis, not so much the usage of water, because ironically the commercial businesses in Subiaco and other areas like this don't use much water at all. You know, I just go to pay my water rates the other day, and they're extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And so is the land tax. So I just want to flag that those two things should be pressured back to the state to do something where you've got land tax higher than the general rate from the city. Thank you.
Just to clarify as well, Councillor Rowe, the City of Subiaco did write to the state government about those matters, highlighting. Thank you. So further speakers on the budget. Councillor Stroud?
I believe, yes, I very much would like to speak to it because of what we have achieved at a very tough time and how interesting that has been in that journey to actually get to a zero rate increase. I've sat, I think it's probably my 9th budget now, and usually the pressure is put back on the councillors to find, you know, to give up various projects and so on to try and keep our budget rate down. This time it was really interesting to watch the staff. The staff really sharpened their pencils, and in each of their respective portfolios they went through and sliced and diced and really managed to bring this budget to achieve a zero rate. You know, not an easy thing to do. Thank goodness we didn't go down the rate of actually reducing the budget by an extra 5%, because that would have been an extra, about 1.2 million we would have had to come up with. We got a bit of, those who opposed that got a bit of flack at the time, Mayor, but it was a very good decision. As it is, we transferred $2 million from the Capital Investment Reserve, and this is a budget at zero rates where we have also given concessions on rents, as well as giving financial incentives to the businesses in the community. So we've given out as well as, you know, retracted and massaged our finances to come up with our zero rate increase. Now, unfortunately, it's also a year in which the GRV is going to hit. And so some people are going to look at their rate notice and think, I haven't got zero rate, what's happened here? So I recommend you divert all those phone calls to the Director Hawkins to talk through what is a rather complicated process to understand, as we know some politicians seem to not understand it either. So I very much commend this to you, Mayor, and I also just want to acknowledge the work of staff. There was very much an individual and team effort to make that. We didn't see Director Hawkins for a while. He had obviously had his head very much burrowed down into the detail of it. And in that regard, he had an acting director who also stepped up to fulfil his position very well, attend councils and so on. So a lot really was going on behind the scenes, besides also creating what is an incredibly busy time with Zooming and COVID and everything else. We managed, the staff managed to organise 2 strategic workshops on this budget as well to accommodate councillors. Some could make one, some could make others, some councillors came to both. And through that very concerted effort, we got 0 rate increase. Well done. I commend it to you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Stroud, just for clarification, it is kind of hidden a little on page 23 of the attachments, but fortunately we're looking at an average decrease of rates to every ratepayer in the order of 6%. So it's a 0%. The rates take is the same, but because we have applied the transfer of the $2 million, that has been directly applied to ratepayers, and on average across the city of Subiaco, every ratepayer is receiving a 6% average rate decrease. So that is very good news. Any other further speakers on the motion? Councillor Jennings.
It's just, again, it's not to, it's just to say thank you to staff for all your efforts, and it was well done, and at a difficult time and a very busy time with everything else that was going on. So thank you very much.
If there's no further speakers, we could look to Councillor Jennings to close. Or that was the close? That was the close. Okay. Well, that was the close, and I'll call the vote on the budget, please. So the budget is passed 11-0. Thank you, councillors. Congratulations, staff. Councillors, we now come to item C7 on page 98 of your agenda. It's the financial statements and reports for the month ending 30th of June 2020. We have the officer's recommendation that the financial reports be endorsed. This was pulled due to a declaration. Do I have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mansfield. Thank you, Councillor Nash. Councillor Mansfield, did you want to speak to the motion? I'll take that as a reserve. Okay, thank you. Any other speakers to the motion? I'll look to putting it to the vote if there's not. I'll call the vote, please, on C7. So C7 is carried 9-2. So, councillors, we now we only have 2 items left on our confidential agenda. So I'll look to close the meeting to the public. I'll need a mover and a seconder for the procedural motion. Thank you. Oh, I've got a show of hands. I think I got Councillor Davis and Councillor Mansfield. To close the meeting to the public pursuant to section 5.232A and F and FI of the Local Government Act, while 13.1 and 13.2 are considered. Please note, when we go behind closed doors to discuss confidential items, live streaming and recording will be paused until we return back to the public meeting. So I've got a mover and a seconder. I'll call the vote on the procedural motion, please. Councillor McMullen, I'm just waiting for you to cast your vote on the confidential procedural. I think we're there. Okay, so it was carried 11-0, so we will now go behind closed doors. Thank you, staff. Don't make me laugh. Resume the public component of our meeting. Recommendation that the City of Subiaco review of systems and procedures 6 was carried, and the 30 to the commencement date of a temporary